Your job is the place that God is using to provide for your needs, but your job is also the place that God is using to develop your character. What if you saw your job not mainly as the place that God is working through you, but mainly as the place that God is working in you? What if your faith could actually thrive in a hostile environment that you call your job? Well, those are the questions, and that is the theme that I believe this text is speaking to. Now, in the Bible, there's times where we can go straight from the text, right to our lives. One of the verses that I love, and it's the first verse that I taught my children to memorize, and it's a verse that I constantly go back to, is Proverbs 3:5, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding." And that verse is just like Bible, life, right? You can get right into it. But this verse, specifically verse 18, we can't just go right from the text to our lives. We have to go to our brains, and we have to go back and look at some cultural backgrounds, because our translation says servants in verse 18, but other translations say slaves. And so we get into a sticky area, especially with the history that we have in our nation. And so what people do is they're like, oh, there's another one, right? There's another example of Christianity being socially and morally regressive. See, they endorse slavery. Well, let's take a second. In the first century, the way servanthood or slavery was done was radically different than the way it was done in our nation. In our nation, it's what's called chattel slavery, meaning people were kidnapped against their will, brought to our country to do labor. American slavery was race-based, it was lifelong, and it was forced. There was no option. Now, the problem is, when you start doing the history, what you learn is several of the founders of our country, who, in all appearances, were Christians, owned slaves, as well as several great Christian theologians. So, in fact, some people that say you're using the Bible to justify horrible things, it's true. It's just true, because our forefathers did it. Some of the men that we stand on the shoulders of theologically did it. They used these verses to justify the horrible institution of slavery. But they did it against what the Bible teaches clearly. Men and women created in the image of God, Genesis 1 says. They did it in obvious contradiction to their own documents, the Declaration of Independence, for instance. Every person endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And they did it against 1 Timothy 1:10 that says, do not kidnap people and put them into slavery. Don't do that. So they did it because they didn't understand the difference between first century servanthood and American slavery. In the first century, all races were slaves, and all races had slaves. Sometimes you would have slaves of the same race. Slaves owned slaves. So meaning you had people working for you when you yourselves were working in a situation of slavery. How did all this happen? Well, what happened is people, and we've talked about this, and this is documented history, not just Christian history. When people would get sick or old or babies were not wanted, they would just put them out to die in the streets in the first century in the Greco-Roman world. Christians would adopt these people. Well, they had no social standing, they had no way to provide for themselves, and so they would become servants in the home. Another thing that would happen is people would go into debt, or they were just poor and they couldn't pay off their debt. There was no way, there was no welfare system, and really the option was like, go to prison, but that really wasn't, they didn't have prisons like that. So what would you do? You would work off your debt. And so this is what Peter is speaking of. Somebody like, why would he just condemn it? Well, if he condemns it, you're going to hurt the poor because there's no other way for them to work on it. If he condemns it, you're going to hurt the orphans because there was no way to care for them. There were three classes of people during this time. There were those who had full rights as citizens. They were Roman citizens. They were just like the freedoms that we would enjoy, much in the same way. There were freed men, people who had been slaves but had worked off their debt, which is almost always the way that worked. And they had some restricted rights. And then there were servants who really didn't have many rights. And these were the people mainly working in the homes, doing, nannying, cooking, things of that nature. And these are the people that Peter is speaking to. But get a bigger picture, because what Peter's doing, he's challenging all of us to think of ourselves in our jobs as a first century servant. So I don't care how important you are and how many titles you have and how many people report to you. Peter's saying, listen, think of yourself in the condition of a servant. As a servant, in the first century, there was absolute authority over your life. Okay? You could not, you couldn't quit, right? You had to pay your debt. As a worker, there's relative authority over your life. That's what I always tell people when they gripe to me about their job. I'm like, quit! If it's so bad. Oh, I can't do that. Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. Relative authority. However, you're going to spend more time at your job, many of you, than you do with your own family. You're going to spend more mind time. Does that communicate? Mind space. Thinking about, strategizing, planning for your job than you do your own family. And we can argue about the merits of that, but if you have a demanding job in this economy, that's your reality. So here's the reality. You are a person under authority. You're a person under authority. Let's remind ourselves what authority is. We talked about this last week. Here's what authority is. It's the people and institutions that God puts in place to do three things: teach, protect, and correct us. Okay? So primarily, this is a definition made for government, made for parents, even made for church leaders. But there is application to your job, because if you see, and we're going to get there, if you see God has put me in this situation in order to teach me some stuff, and may even protect me from some stuff. Like some of you are like, one day I'm going to have this job and one day I want to do this. Guess what? Maybe God has you where you are now to protect that vision. That if you were thrown into your dream scenario, it would crush you. Maybe you're not ready for it yet. Maybe God's got some stuff to do in you to get you there, right? So I think this definition is relevant. Authority. Now, this is a text primarily for those who are under unjust authority. This is a text for people who are not in a great work environment. Some of you are in a great work environment. And God, be thankful for that. But guess what? It ain't going to last. Right? I mean, you know that, right? You know that you're one new boss, one shift in direction, one market adjustment, one downsizing move away from it going really bad, really fast. So you may not be there now, you will be there at some point in your career, unless you're a purple unicorn, right? And it just all works out all the time for you. Some of you, though, you're in a tough situation now. Like now. You have a bad boss or professor. You have a toxic environment. You dread every day getting up and going to work. And when you're in situations like this, you have many temptations. I'll mention three. One, laziness. You can basically go, this thing is so bad. My boss is such an idiot. This thing is so toxic. I'm going to do as least as possible. Or you can just get super bitter. You can just go, I'm going to do my job and smile on the outside, but on the inside, I'm going to be totally angry and bitter, and I'll hide it the best I can. Right? Some of you, like the folks in our text, are tempted to retaliate. So you're tempted to kind of be like covertly kind of working against your boss, your supervisor, the vision of your company. You are using your words and your influence and manipulating behind the scenes, this is the temptation of the folks that Peter is writing to. So what do you do? What do you do in these situations? What do you do when it's tough? Well, it's easy for me right now. It will be tough. So, or your friend, it's tough for your friend. So, this didn't apply to me. It's all good around. Use this for your friend. What do? Well, you submit to work authority. That's what Peter is saying in verse 18. You submit to work authority. Verse 18, let's read it again. Servants, be subject or submissive to your masters with all respect. Not only to the good and gentle, but also, why do you say this, Bible? Also to the unjust. If you are not offended at the Bible, you're not reading the Bible, people. It is just, man, it's just. So what does it look like? Well, we talked about this last week when we were talking about the government. Submit is a military word. Submit is to acknowledge your rank and act accordingly. So you submit to authority, and he ties respect to it. So respect is another way that he was talking with the government in verse 17 about honoring. It's the same thing. So you submit when you honor. You honor three things. You honor the person, you honor the position, and you honor the vision. All right? So this can get intertwined. And one of the three can be true, and three of the three can be bad. It's all over the map. I remember one of my bosses, William, loved this guy, believed in his vision, thought, he was in the right position. But now I know, back then I was super judgmental because I was in my 20s and I thought I knew everything. I know that's not true for any of our 20-year-olds, but when I was 20, I thought I knew everything. So I was looking at William, who, by the way, now I'm William's age. Back when I was 20, right? So I'm looking at William, who was going through a midlife crisis. I mean, I've Googled it, and I'm like, yep. He was checked out, man. He was checked out. And I was a new employee, and I was trying to learn and grow and be developed, and he was because he was wrestling with just who he was. And I was so young, I didn't even know all this lingo and language, but I just thought, man, this guy's going through a hard time. He's made in the image of God. God's obviously used him. He's gifted. I'm going to honor him as a person. And that's all I could do because I didn't really respect his vision. He'd kind of lost it. I didn't really even, I kind of questioned his position. Why did these people have him in this position but I just went to so that's all I had, so that's what I did. Another boss I had, Rick, great guy, in way over his head. Super engaged, not going through a midlife crisis, awesome vision, awesome guy, but his position, he was just in over his head. And so I had to super work to go, all right, man, God put him here. God entrusted him with this. I'm going to honor this position because wherever you're tempted to dishonor, that's where you need to honor, right? So you really got to work at that. And the low-hanging fruit for me with him was, all right, God's put him here. Another one of my bosses, great guy. I totally saw the position is right. I didn't agree with the vision of where this thing was going, right? And so I had to work really hard and work through, okay, is this because it's the wrong vision, or is this not the vision I see right now? So you have to work through this. There's no easy answers. But this is what it means to respect. And if you have a lack of respect and you can't honor the person, and you have a lack of trust in the company, and you really can't honor the position, why they put him here, why have they fired him, why aren't they dealing with it? If you have a lack of alignment with the vision, you are in a place where you either have to work through that or quit. Because you cannot continue to not honor, right? So how do you submit? In a hard environment, you absolutely have to honor person, position, and vision. You also have to work hard. One of the things that I don't know, you get older and you just like those young people, right? Get off my yard. Like, you get all old and crotchety, and I'm really tempted, to think, oh my gosh, I'm getting old, but there is a reality. There just is a reality. When you're younger, you are super idealistic, and there is an entitlement piece that's just true of all human beings, especially when you're younger. And I want you to hear this, millennial. I hate the word. I hate generational theory, but it's so hip and cool. Let me just say it so I can be hip and cool, right? Millennials, hear me. Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you're going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. Work hard. My dad was the hardest working man I've ever met to this day, not even close. Dropped out of school in 10th grade, never went back, and just made a business for himself. And so, problem is, Dad was an angry worker. Anybody have angry dad worker, like deal going? Like, so you kind of wanted to be around your dad, but then he's like teaching you words that sailors don't know, like, and I just was like, yeah, Dad, I'll kind of be over here. And I was always like, he was a construction guy building houses and all kind. I'd be throwing dirt clods and, working on my change up or whatever when I was a kid. But eventually the bug got me, right? And I really got to, though I was kind of a slacker growing up, I was fired from my first 3 jobs because I was so lazy. But eventually I got it and I started working hard. And then we start the church, right? And we can't afford employees. I was bivocational. I used to lay carpet and like ceramic tile. That was my job. And then we were worked to plant the church. And so we didn't have money, but we had volunteers. And at that time, and actually all the time in a church, you need volunteers to really step up and use their gifts in the church. You just can't get all the work that God has for a local church done by paying people, paying staff. We had this one volunteer, her name was Chrissy, and she was awesome. And here's what she did. Because at that time, man, I got my head down. I got a young family. The church is in my mind, right? It's more than it's really out. We're just trying to make this happen. We just started. I was overwhelmed. I was freaked out. And I had this girl, Chrissy, who was like super volunteer, and she was serving. And what that did for me, hear me, if you're in a situation that you feel like the boss is just not hearing you, or like, she worked and served, and it gave her credibility to speak into some of my chaos, my nonsense, my sin as the boss. Because she was so faithful and because she worked so hard, I would say, Chrissy, what do you see? What do you see in my life? What do you see in that? What do you think we need to do? And she was able to, and she was so gentle and so smart about it. She was able to say, well, what if we did this? And how about this? And Darrin, when you say that and people cry, that's probably not a good thing. Like, just little things, right? But so your work earns you, in a sense, the right to speak into the environment and the culture you're in. Like, and so don't just Don't just go underground with that. Don't just go, well, I'm the little peon, I can't speak. No, your work will give you room to make some changes in the environment that you're in. And that is the way to respond to a hostile work environment. You submit, right? You honor, and you work hard. Now, another way you must do this, according to the text, is you must be focused. This is the power, right? On the ultimate boss. Like, some of our problem is we think our boss is our boss. We think our professor is our professor. Now, we got a capital B boss. We got a capital P professor. This is what he's talking about in verse 19. He says, this is a gracious thing when, and I want to focus on this phrase, mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. Peter is challenging his readers to deal with suffering by having a Godward focus in their current state of dissatisfaction. When you get frustrated in your job, your temptation is to just go horizontal and gripe and moan to everybody around you, start like sending resumes out, right? You know, and what Peter's saying is, would you stop? Would you stop that? And ask this question, not what's my boss doing? What's my next opportunity? New question, God, what are you doing? Mindful of God. Present with God, inviting God in to your difficult situation. He's the ultimate boss. Here's the problem. This is so hard to do because our work, if you noticed, is diabolical in its pursuit to be our main identity. You notice this about your job? It absolutely demands and requires that you comply and say, my job is who I am. What I do is who I am. Which is why the first question when you meet somebody new is what? What do you do? Right? And you're in some situation and people are like, I can't believe I go to a restaurant and I meet 3 people and I come out with 12 business cards. I don't know how this works because everybody's got like 3 jobs now. Business card. What is that? It's that and it can be, it's easy to be critical. You start doing the math though, you know, something like 90,000 hours you'll spend at your job in your lifetime. It becomes, and it's especially hard when you're suffering in your job to not make it your identity. But what Peter's saying is you have to refuse it. And I say that, I use that word, you have to refuse it. It's going to come and say, do this, and you're going to have to say, no, I'm not going to do it. I will not let my job define me. No matter how good it is, no matter how bad it is, no matter how hard it gets, I'm not going to do it. Now, there's a reason why it vies for our identity, and it is because the Bible ties human creation right next to human production. You go back to Genesis 2. God creates Adam. What does he do? Adam, hang out and let's just, I want you to spend the next 1,000 years just looking at stars and telling me about how awesome I am. No. Adam, get in that garden and go to work, son. Get in that garden and cultivate. Cultivate. Take what's there, take the raw materials of the earth and make it better. Is that not what work is? Right? That's the essence of work. Taking what's there, making it better. Adam was built to improve the world. To take the goods of the world and improve them. By the way, that's our call too. It's called the cultural mandate. We're called to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. The idea is this. It doesn't mean we abuse creation. It means that we rule over God's creation with God's authority to bring about God's purposes. What if you could see your job that way? And sometimes it's hard to make that connection, but that what you're doing, either because of the development that's happening in you, or the product that your company is selling, or the vision that it has, or the people that you're working, I'm actually taking what's there and I'm making it better. doing work and being a human being are intrinsically connected. This is why you must work. You cannot not work. Now, you may not be getting paid for your work. In fact, Seth Godin has a very interesting dichotomy here. He says, there's a difference between your job and your work. Your job is what you're paid to do. Your work is what you were made to do. And sometimes those coalesce and intersect, and sometimes they don't. But you have to work. If that's part of your job, awesome. Sometimes it's going to be outside of your job. But this demand, make your job your identity. You are what you do. That voice will never be quieted. It's always real. And probably the best example that I've seen in media is that old school movie that was on before most of you were born, Chariots of Fire. Remember it? 2 athletes in the British Empire competing at the Olympics. Eric Liddell, Harold Abrahams, both running races. And Liddell is his sister Jenny. He's going to go be a missionary in China. He's a Christian. And his sister Jenny's like, you should not run. You should just focus on mission work. And he's like, you know what? God made me fast. And when I run, say it with me if you know it, I feel his pleasure. And but he's like, God made me for China, so I'm going to China. But right now I'm going to run. Abraham's was, here was his classic phrase. He ran the 100-yard dash. He said, I have 10 seconds to justify my existence. I'm never content, and I don't think I ever will be. Why? Because his running was his identity. Liddell's like, I'll run. We'll see what happens. I'm going to go to China. I might die. Okay. Totally different deal. And this is why one enjoys their work, the other's defined by it. This is your temptation. Can you enjoy your work? Can you be mindful of God? Can you realize God has you are for a purpose? Can you submit? Can you honor? Can you actually experience God? Or are you going to be bitter, driven, always frustrated, always looking for the next opportunity? These are our options. And I love what Peter's doing because he's essentially saying, what I want you to do is I want you to step back. I want you to step back from your suffering. I want you to step back from your work. And I want you to see God. And you know what? You can do that too. And you should do that, only every day and just about every hour. Where you take 2 minutes and just go, okay, wait a minute. Well, what would happen if you could just do that? All right, God, you're here, you're in this, help me. You're here, you're in this, help me. You're here, you're in this. You may have to say it 3 times. You're here, you're in this, help me. What if you did that once an hour this whole next week during your job? What would happen? Right? Well, I tell you what would happen. You would actually embrace your calling to suffer at work. Instead of resenting it, instead of fighting against it, instead of being bitter at God about it, you would actually embrace it. Look in verse 21. Verse 21. Man. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you may follow in his steps. Your job is never going to satisfy you, ultimately. But if you will look at your job as a way to suffer for the gospel, something amazing could happen. If you would look at your job not as the apex of your happiness, not as the place that you escape from your, but no, wait a minute, I'm going to suffer. I'm going really to act like Jesus. That's what he's saying. Act like Jesus. I'm going to act like Jesus. Well, how did Jesus act? Well, let's keep reading. Verse 22, he, Jesus, committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. Peter is not saying that if you're in an unjust situation that you should not use the full measure of the law, because we know in other places, and with Paul and Peter in the New Testament, that there's, Paul makes an appeal to the law when his life was in danger. So it doesn't mean you're just a doormat and if illegal things are going, but he's talking about the spirit and our attitude in this whole thing. And he's saying, I want you to act like Jesus. Now, and do you remember these? This was when I was a youth pastor. Did anybody have these bracelets? Anybody that old? WWJD. What? Let's say it together. What would Jesus do? And our church was a church that attracted a bunch of people who weren't Christians, and so our teenagers said, that stands for We Want Jack Daniels. But it's actually, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? It's a great question. And we always think like moral issues. We always think like, but how would Jesus suffer today? Who would he suffer for? What would it look like to go to work with that mentality that I'm here to suffer for Jesus? That's part of what it means to act like Jesus. What did Jesus do? He didn't slander. The most unjust. People ask all the time, well, how could God let this atrocity, how could this happen? And there's some hard questions that have hard answers. But listen, the most unjust, atrocious, inhumane, unrighteous, ungodly act in the history of the world is when the Son of God, the innocent Son of God, was put on a cross. That's the worst thing that's ever happened in humanity. And he didn't retaliate. And he didn't slander. And he entrusted himself to he who judges righteously. That's what it means to act like Jesus. He followed the chain of command. I mean, so that's heavy. Let me give you the other side. Act like Jesus, but also act like a sinner. Act like a sinner. Look in verse 24. He himself bore our sins in his body on a tree that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseers of your souls. Now this is a whole thing about the atonement, and we'll spend more time on it a little bit later in Peter. But at the end of the day, in context, I think what he's saying is, will you please, in your situation where you are under authority, will you please not be the holier than thou girl? Would you please not be the I do no wrong guy? Would you please understand that the biggest issue at your work is you? The biggest problem in your company is you? That it's your sin that's causing most of the dysfunction in your life? Would you please realize that you need to be saved more than your company? Would you please realize that your sin's a bigger deal than your bosses? Maybe not in the dynamic of the company, but would you please be more concerned about your stuff than everybody else's? Because then when you are, then you come at other people's weaknesses and sufferings with a desire to act like Jesus. What did Jesus do? He took responsibility and accountability for things that weren't his fault. He sacrificed first. He forgave most, right? I think that's what Peter's doing. Our jobs, friends, are this like constant reminder that there's more to life. Our jobs are this constant reminder that we need to repent of our own sin. Our jobs are this constant exposure to our own rebellion. And if we're always blaming, if we're always talking smack, if we're always like at the water cooler or at the happy hour, always like that's just not going to honor God. And it's not going to make you happy. It's going to keep you stirred up and on the edge all the time. And I know there's office politics and I know there's situations, but man, I'm saying Christians ought to be different. I'm not saying it. I think Peter is saying that. So let me close with three questions I'd like you to consider asking yourself. First one's pretty simple. Do you see your job as a gift? I mean, do you see that? Do you realize that if you're an upperly mobile professional, not just a professional, you're in the top 1% of the whole world in income? I mean, you're making $40,000, $50,000, top 1% of the whole world. We have this thing so skewed in our heads because we compare ourselves to like millionaires. Rest of the world living on $1 a day, a couple billion of them, right? Do you see your job as a gift? And kind of a harder question, where are you, not if, where are you dishonoring authority in your space at work? Where is it? Is it around like not seeing people made in the image of God? So that's the only way we can slander, discredit, retaliate if we go, they're less than human. That's the only way this works. Are you dishonoring the position that somebody has? I ought to have that position. Well, if God wanted you to have that position, you would have that position. Well, I'm working to get promoted. Keep working. Until then, honor, right? And then the last one. How can you serve? You guys ever eat Christian chicken? You ever go to Chick-fil-A? I'd never been to Chick-fil-A until like 2 years ago, until they had one over by my house. I'm not a big fast food guy, and I just went in there, and I'd heard about it, and I heard some of the I was like, wow. You ever been there? Not the food. The food's okay. It's the people and how they're trained. And their whole deal is, how can I serve you? What can I do? What if that was your attitude? What if you went in? Not like, I got space on my head here for a crown. Anybody want to crown me today, King? What if you went in with a towel on your arm, ready to wash feet? Like, what would happen to your heart? What would happen to your environment? That's this invitation from this text. Let's pray and ask God to help it be real in our lives. Lord, thank you. Thank you that you know what we need. Thank you that you know where we need to be. Thank you that you know our bosses, our supervisors, our companies. Thank you that you know our struggle. Some of us need better paying jobs, God. Some of us are stuck, and Lord, you know. So Lord, would you just give us hope that you are not finished with us, that we have good work to do, but help us to be mindful that the work you're doing in us is more important than the work that you're doing through us. So help us, Lord, as we try to submit. Help us as we try to see past our boss to the ultimate boss. Help us, Lord, to suffer well so that when people look at us, they say, wow, that man, that woman, that reminds me of what I've heard about Jesus. And so, Lord, we trust you to do that. Friends, let's let this sit with us for a minute. I know there's probably names, faces popping up in your head. There's longings in your heart. There's desires about doing what kind of that job work distinctive thing. Some of us are stuck in jobs and we really want to be about our work. So just, hey, pour that out to the Lord right now. Just pray. Say, Lord, you know my heart. You know what I feel like I'm called to do. And ask him to provide, and ask him to give opportunities, and ask him to show up. Let's be mindful of him as we think about our jobs. Let's do that now.